if there is any difference between us and the animals, it is the obligation to this form of planetary wholeness, through wholeness of self and wholeness of every atom of human organization, through the couple, the affinity group, the tribe, the larger context of one's friends and acquaintances. And the New Age has the rhetoric of collectivity in the same way that the psychedelic generation of the 60s had the rhetoric of collectivity. But in each case, it was vitiated by various factors which tended to inject masculine values into the context that was evolving. G.K. Chesterton said, "Men are men, but man is a woman." And the problem has been that we have been run by little men. In other words, that small people who bought into the idea that ideas should rule have been at the tiller of history for a very long time. The goddess, which is this hidden notion that men are men, but man is a woman, the goddess has been completely suppressed. Most embryologists would probably agree with the statement that men are hormonally modified female fetuses, and human civilization is a hormonally modified corpus delicti, if you wish. And the hormonal modification is for purposes of transcendence, which once achieved, the historical model of human beings will be useless. I'm sure you know the fable or the story or the folklore about how when Buddha crossed the river of enlightenment in the boat of the Dharma, when he reached the other side, someone said, "What are you going to do with your boat?" And he said, "Well, now that I'm on the other side, I have no need of it." And this is, I think, how we need to think of the patriarchal, linear, uniform culture. It created a context for saving the entire biosphere. Now the entire biosphere can be saved only through the transcendence of that previous context. So it is very important for those people who are interested in psilocybin to go deeper into it and try to language the previously unlanguaged feeling. Because you see, the feeling is not in principle unlanguageable. It's simply that no utility accrued to it in the male constellated value system. Once we understand now that the evolution of communication now depends on the evolution of a language of emotion, we can see that the evolution of a language of emotion is the primary task of psychedelic users, and the using of that language of emotion to communicate and to bootstrap ourselves to higher and higher levels of caring. This will all happen within the context of the project of caring for being, which was Heidegger's formulation for what life is all about. And I have not read Heidegger on Eros, but I do believe that Eros and the project of caring for being cannot be divided apart. Now, I want to close by reading a brief quote from Jacob Needleman that very synchronistically Kat discovered just a few minutes before we left the house today. The impact of Socrates is to produce upon a human being a specific sort of suffering that involves seeing oneself against a very high criterion of what human beings should be. But this seeing of oneself is not a moralistic effort to persuade oneself to do better. On the contrary, its effect is to kindle eros, a longing for being. The impact of Socratic interrogation, which is objective self-interrogation, is the suffering that results from the repeated and prolonged confrontation in oneself between what is meant to be, between what one is meant to be, and what one is. Until a human being passes through this fire, all of his efforts at virtue will fail. And I think there is no more intense way to pass through that fire than with the psychedelic experience. I've always assumed with the I Ching that the sign of the psychedelic experience was Li, the clinging flame. And I think to pass through that clinging flame is to discover this context of what we may be as opposed to what we are. What I really hope and imagine is happening is that a true anarchy might be possible through the cultivation of responsibility, not out of intellectual appreciation of the need to do that, but out of a more natural and spontaneous and visceral need to do that, which arises quite spontaneously. In other words, anarchy can never be erected on a substratum of theoretical considerations. It has to be erected on a substratum of very intense, realized feelings. And this is what things like the nuclear freeze and the whole liberal agitation for global consciousness of global problems is all about. Realizing the responsibility that we all share toward each other, and then, feeding people in the world who are hungry, curing diseases in portions of the world where diseases are endemic. These will not be great philanthropic undertakings. They will be things seen to be as natural and necessary as caring for your own backyard. And the psychedelics promote this because they show the commonality of being. They make you feel the family of human beings rather than theoretically understand it. The other force which will create this anarchy of responsibility is the evolution of language, which I mentioned in the lecture. Someone asked me more what I meant about that, whether I meant simply new words for new feelings, which is certainly part of it, and much of what's gone on in California in the past 10 years in terms of vocabulary construction has been put down as psychobabble. But nevertheless, there is a useful residuum in that, and that will stay in the language. More than that, I can imagine ontological transformations of language so that we can actually show each other our thoughts by discovering proto-languages or assembly languages in the human organization that do not require a culturally validated dictionary to be understood. In other words, the things like chanting and toning and that sort of thing, they do convey emotions, but very generalized emotions, because at this state of evolution of our emotional vocabularies, all emotions are generalized emotions. But eventually this might be refined to a very high state. I mean, our great artists are capable of this. I can remember when I first read The Remembrance of Things Past by Marcel Proust, there are a number of places in there where you realize with a real sense of shock that you had never even articulated to yourself this feeling. let alone ever attempted to articulate it to another person, because it seems so personal and non-generalizable that you thought it was uniquely yourself, and yet here it is on the printed page. And we need more of this, because seeing that emotion portrayed on the printed page, I have an immense sense of revalidation of my own experience of it. And there are many, many emotions like this. I remember particularly an incident in the Remembrance of Things Past where the narrator, whose name I forget, is riding in a carriage to a very elegant party with this ancient, crumbling Contessa, who is the matron of the society of the Rue de Saint-Germain, and she's prattling on about something, someone's love affair, someone's jewelry, something, and they pass a certain group of trees, which the narrator glimpses out the window, and he feels this immense desire to stop the carriage and to go over and look at the trees for no reason at all. And yet he feels that some kind of immense choice is being made, and that if he doesn't stop the carriage, his life will be irrevocably different, and that something very precious will be lost and never regained. And meantime, he's trying to maintain in this intense, formal social situation, and he does nothing. And the moment passes and is forgotten by him, I'm sure. But you participated and say, I felt like that. I wanted to do that. And it seems so irrational, so obscure, so caught up in the processes of my own becoming that I would never even mention or describe it to someone. Here it is, validated as a general experience of human beings. And we need to do this for each other a lot. I'm very shocked to realize how much communication goes on that is not direct communication between human beings. How much reading, listening, watching, how rarely there is actually one-to-one conversation between human beings, and yet that is where the progress really takes place. We undervalue it. We don't even notice that it's being taken away from us, and that media and packaged interaction is replacing it.